Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Lifestyle Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Derek Williams, and I'm excited to have one of my favorite clients with me today, Dr. Steve Darley. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing well. It's weird to hear that intro on the other side of the tape. So I'm doing well. Hopefully, I can help some of the listeners out there, like your previous clients have.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to talk through your experiences. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are really interested in, your main. I think a big part of our focus is going to be transitioning to 3 days a week, and a lot of the kind of like the mindset barriers, and working through stuff like that, and just kind of some of that process. So before we kind of get into that, give us kind of an introduction to yourself as far as dental background and what has got you to where you are now.
Yeah, no problem. So I graduated Nova Southeastern Dental School down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 2019. And after my dental school career, I did a 1 year residency in Orlando, Florida. I'm originally from Orlando, and so just headed back home. And I had a couple of friends do a residency program in Orlando that they really enjoyed. And my main goal and focus for the residency was just to learn advanced surgery skills, extractions, implants, um, root canals, and just feel more comfortable doing clinical dentistry. And luckily, I had a couple friends go through the program and they really enjoyed it. So I did that for a year. And right after residency, I started to work in a fee-for-service practice right near where I grew up. It was an older doctor, and it wasn't ready for an associate yet. I was his first associate, and I'm sure a lot of people out there have had similar experiences coming out of either whether it be dental school or residency, and you start at either the dental office that you went to when you were growing up, or someone who thought they were ready to settle down and start doing less dentistry, but it just wasn't the case, and it wasn't very busy. So I worked there for about 3 months. He was an excellent mentor to have for those 3 months. I just wasn't getting the chance to see as many patients as I wanted. And so I decided to look more at the DSO route during that time. And I found a smaller DSO group in Orlando that I work for. That was really good. I really enjoyed my time there, but ultimately I knew that I wanted to own my own practice. So I stayed there for about a year, maybe a year and a couple months. But during that time, I was pretty much aggressively looking to own a practice, listening to, as many podcasts as I could listen to, and trying to find the perfect practice in the area. This was the year after COVID, so it was a pretty hard time to find a practice. It took me about, I want to say, 6 or 8 months to kind of find a practice that I thought was a good fit. And I ended up buying that practice in November of 2021. And during that time when I was buying the practice, I was listening to a lot of TLP podcasts, a lot of shared practices podcasts, and I really kind of resonated with Justin and kind of his mentality of creating your dental practice to kind of serve you rather than the other way around. Because I did have a chance to kind of see a couple different offices, the fee-for-service office and the DSO office. And both of those offices, they were open 5 days a week. The dentist worked all 5 days, and it just didn't seem to me like they had accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. And maybe I was naive at the time, but listening to Justin and some other guys on the podcast, I just kind of wanted to strive for getting down to owning my own practice for one, getting down to 3 days per week for two, which still kind of feels surreal to me, but those were kind of my end goals. And so that's what I had in mind. And so that's why I reached out to Justin and hired Justin, and in hopes of him getting me down to 3 days a week eventually, but mainly just surviving that first year of ownership, as I know a lot of people have survived. So that was a tough time for me, and super valuable. I don't know if I could have done it without Justin's help during that time. But since then, just trying to grow the practice and slowly get down to 3 days per week. So that was in 2021. So it's been a little over 3 years now, and I'm just now making that transition with you down to 3 days per week. And do you want me to kind of run through the process of start to finish?
So let me ask you before we kind of go through more of that process. You talk about the challenges and how difficult it was in that first year or two as far as ownership. What were, like, when you look back on it? I mean, because uh, I think a lot of our listeners are relatively young, and so now that you've got a few years hindsight and you look back, what are some of the things that were most challenging for you, and how do you feel about them now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's changed since I originally went through that process, but I know during the initial first 6 months of buying the practice, the hardest part was dealing with the staff and trying to not only please all of the patients, please the staff, um, but making the practice kind of how I envisioned and making changes in the practice and trying to improve the practice, right? So I bought a practice that was smaller. When I bought it, they were only producing 550,000 per year on average. Granted, that was the year after COVID. I think he averaged probably 600,000 before COVID. Um, but to me, it was managing the staff, and I think a lot of people will tell you that. And I think getting rid of the staff that I knew needed to be let go of was the hardest thing for me. And I know if you talk to Justin, he would tell you the same thing. Is I was kind of hard headed and stubborn when that happened. Um, I think and we've talked about this a lot on our calls, just kind of having the mentality of wanting to be a people pleaser and wanting the staff to like me, and nothing against those staff members. They were great staff members and great people. I had nothing against them personally, but I didn't think they were the best fit for the practice, and having to let them go is extremely hard. I would still say that that was the hardest part. It still is today. I think dealing with the staff is still my biggest hurdle, and you've helped me with some of that. And I think that's something that I'm constantly striving to get better at.
Yeah, it's interesting in acquisitions, and I've talked about this before, but you can look at everything on paper. You can evaluate numbers and procedures, insurance involvement, and fees, profit. Like, there's so many things that you can evaluate, but there's the one thing that I feel like is always the biggest crapshoot is it's really tough to know what kind of a staff is going to be in the practice, how supportive of they are going to be to in the transition, what's their relationship with the seller, how good they are they at taking feedback. And these are all things that, like, really play a big part in the acquisition experience, but there's really not any metrics or anything that can kind of quantify that in any way. And so some acquisitions are easier than others in that regard, and some are pretty challenging in that regard as well. But regardless, as you're saying, I mean, yeah, 3-4 years later, and still a hurdle, still a challenge. And for me, I feel like it is one thing, like everything else, I got a little bit better at it each year, and the last year was my favorite with my staff. I have a lot of fond feelings as far as things, but yeah, like you said, it's something that you continue to work on. You recognize some of your errors and issues and continue to kind of work through those. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Share. Why don't you share some numbers real quick as far as like practice performance? So when you bought the practice, it was like 550, 600. What did you do for the first few years after that?
Yeah, so the first year we did 980,000, my first full year. The second year we did around 1.2. I think it was 1,180,000. And then year three, we just did 1.4 last year, which was our goal, and we barely hit it. And I actually got married in November and had a honeymoon and took a lot of November off. So I was pretty bummed that we missed the 1.5 I think we could have got. But either way, super happy and hoping to grow even more with you.
Yeah. So let's transition. So you worked with Justin for a period of time, and then you're kind of on your own, and then you decide to reach out. Was there anyone that you worked with in between, or what led you to the point to reaching out to me and moving forward, continuing to kind of push things?
Yeah, I didn't work with anybody in between. Justin helped me grow a ton, and I felt like I was not ready to go down to 3 days a week. I don't, he was trying to get me to go down 3 days a week. And I was like, man, I want to, but I don't know if I just didn't feel worthy or not. But I think when you get out of dental school, the first couple of years, I really wanted to work, like 5 days a week, let's just do as much clinical dentistry as we can. And then when I bought my practice, I thought immediately that 4 days was too much, but I still wanted to try to grow the practice. And when I first bought it, it was only doing, we only had one full-time hygienist. So one of my main goals was to get to two full-time hygiene, and I thought staying open 4 days a week would help with that. And um, over the past year or so, I've been having some kind of just like body aches. I've started to notice my neck hurting a little bit more, my back hurting a little bit more. I've been more stressed, and I don't know exactly what kind of made me just say, you know what, I'm going down to 3 days a week, but it may have been one of your episodes I was listening to, I think on shared practices, where you said you were beginning to work with shared practices, and I knew I wanted to work with you at some point, and I was worried with, Justin kind of moving on to other things, and you retiring from clinical dentistry, and Steve Van de Graaff retiring from clinical dentistry, that my window may close. So, I was ready. My body was hurting. I was really stressed out. I wasn't having fun anymore with the practice. I don't think I realized how burnout I was, but on the weekends, if I thought about the practice, it would almost make me sick to my stomach, like I wasn't wanting to work on the business anymore. Whereas the first 2 years I owned the practice, I was excited. I loved it. I was in the practice on the weekends as much as I could, just making improvements, whether that be, with, renovations or systems or checklists or anything. So I think I just slowly over time got to the point where I just said I didn't want to work 4 days anymore, and reached out to you, and you were ready to go right when I reached out to you, which I was super happy about, and I'm glad I have so far. This first couple weeks of 2025 have been amazing.
Yeah, very cool. It's interesting to hear you talk about the decision to go to 3 days a week, because I feel like, I mean, my experience is relatively similar, where it's just like you kind of, for me it was, I remember, told this story before, but I was listening to the book Relentless by Tim Grover. I dropped off my girls at school. I think it was August. It was like, one of the first or second weeks of school, and the schedule had maybe slowed down slightly, and I was like, he talks in the book about just like obviously being relentless, like choose what you want and just go after it. And I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna start 3 days a week. So I made the decision on the drive. 10 minutes later, I get to the office and I tell my front desk, cancel all my Thursdays next month. I'm gonna just work 3 days a week, and we're gonna see how it goes. And so just like that, it was. And so in your situation, obviously in your situation, there was more preparation, there was more planning, there was kind of more time, but it sounds like still maybe kind of some things where it feels like your back's up against the wall and it's like, okay, I got to do something. Okay, let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah, I probably dragged mine on 11 months longer than you did after making that decision, but I definitely thought about it for a long time, and yeah, I'm just glad I finally. I could definitely see myself going another 5 years not making the decision looking back, like, man, what am I doing? So honestly, whether I waited a year or not, I'm just happy that I've made the decision now just to, move forward and find out whether it was the right answer or not.
Yeah. Um, it's yeah, it's interesting. I think there's so many things like that in life. Like so many people could probably say the same thing about practice ownership that you just said about going to 3 days a week, where it's like, I after I did it, I realized, I probably wasn't that much prepared, that much more prepared for it, like a year later than I was, before. It's just one of those things that you just have to kind of take a leap of faith and be like, okay, I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work out, and there's going to be some unanticipated challenges and things to kind of go through, but I'm ready. Let's go. I was just going to say, so with and even when you reached out to me as far as working together and kind of making this happen, you kind of had somewhat of a similar dilemma, but on a micro scale, right? You were you reached out and you're like, hey, this is where I'm at. I think this is what I want to do. Really want to go to 3 days a week, and I want you to help me prepare. But I'm getting married in November. I'm thinking maybe I should wait until after. So, tell me just like talk a little bit about your thoughts then, and like how you made the decision, and now in retrospect, was it the right decision, or do you think, yeah, maybe I could have waited, it would have been a little bit better?
Yeah, you're right. Even though I reached out to you, I was still kind of on the fence about when I wanted to start. I was thinking honestly in my head when I reached out to you that you may have a wait list or you may not take me right away. I just wasn't sure. So when I sent the email out, I was surprised to hear you email me back and be like, "Hey, man, I'm ready to, let's rock and roll right now. I'm ready to go." So honestly, I wasn't ready for that response, but it was good because. When I reached out to you, I wasn't thinking about, my wedding coming up, my honeymoon. I was just thinking like, hey, I would like to get down to 3 days a week. I'm at a point to where I just was not enjoying it anymore. And so when you reached out to me, I think I responded and I was like, hey man, like I'm going to be taking off pretty much all of November. I don't know if it's worth meeting in early October, and me being gone for pretty much all of November and wouldn't be able to, one, I would be distracted leading up to the wedding, and two, I wouldn't be able to probably get as much done as I would like. And so you responded back and, you just said, hey, man, I think it's good to get started earlier rather than later. And I thought about it. I talked to my wife a little bit about it, and I think she was on the other side of it. She thought, she didn't want me to be distracted during our wedding and leading up to the wedding and our honeymoon. But honestly, I think it actually worked out better because we had our first meeting, kind of set our game plan going into the new year. So honestly, I think I was able to relax more during the wedding and the honeymoon because I knew that we had a game plan that we were going to start right when I returned. So I'm a big fan of kind of acting when the motivation is high. If you have something that you want to do and your motivation is really high and you have that energy and you have that urge, I think it's important to use that energy and that motivation when you have it. And I'm glad you kind of talked me into doing it early because I think it helped out. And who knows what could have changed? Maybe I changed my mind and didn't hire you after the wedding and honeymoon. I'd be so relaxed. I'm like, man, no, my life is good. I can go back to work in 4 days a week, right? And sometimes that happens. You take some time off. You take 2 weeks off. You feel great, and then you're back a month later. Sometimes it only takes a week. You're back to square one. So I'm glad it worked out the way it did. But I can definitely see where, it's a tough decision. It is a decent amount of money that you're spending, and it's sometimes hard to ask for help and be vulnerable. And it's worked out so far. So happy that I did it.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating for me to listen at this point, and for you to, in retrospect, say, I was worried. My wife was worried. Maybe I wouldn't be as, I'd be too stressed because, then I'd be having to focus on this, and the opposite sort of happened. And that I've felt that too in my life, when you can get alignment with other things, other areas, it seems to carry over into or spill over into like a lot of different facets of life. So if you feel good about the direction and the planning professionally, it allows you to feel better about, your personal life, and to feel less like you have to kind of like keep thinking about it, and knowing that it's kind of like hanging there in the back of your mind. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because that was something that I hadn't heard you voice before. So pretty cool. Let's talk. Let's transition and talk about the logistics. How we kind of developed the plan, going 3 days a week. What were some of the barriers and obstacles? I think this is probably like one of the probably like top questions that a lot of like TLP followers have is, okay, well, what's going to happen? So I think you being able to open up and share, what your questions and concerns were, and what the planning was like, is going to be probably very helpful and eye opening for a lot of people.
Yeah, sure. So I'm only, a couple weeks in, or I guess 20 days into 2025 right now. And so I'm still trying to figure that out. I haven't, perfected the schedule yet. And honestly, constantly working on that. Last weekend, I went back through the TLP modules on scheduling just to kind of look at some examples of, I think Justin does two of those videos, and I think you do one of them. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
And looking at those just to kind of train or help my front desk is very good at scheduling. She's great, but when I took over the practice, the seller doc was kind of slowing down, and even though he had two available chairs, or I guess he used three because they only had one hygienist at the time. My office just has four chairs, and so at the time he only had one hygienist. Now we have two, but she basically just scheduled, down one column, didn't really utilize the second column on the schedule. And so it has been a learning process to kind of get the schedule figured out and figure out the most efficient way and productive way, even before I was going down to 3 days a week, just to kind of fit in as much dentistry, but obviously have a balance of not being too stressed or run behind schedule. So that's the number one hurdle that we're trying to figure out right now together. And just to be transparent, my office is mainly fee for service, so it does make it a little bit, I guess, easier, I would say, because I think I do have to see less patients than the typical PPO office, which makes it easier to schedule, obviously, because you're looking at higher production per patient per procedure. But that helps. But just trying to figure out the puzzle piece, I know we've talked about that, of not only me figuring, I think the first step is me figuring out the best way to schedule, right? Like I can't teach my front desk how to schedule until I kind of master it. And that's hard to do. I mean, I don't even know how long it takes me to do every procedure. So a little sidetrack is kind of the process of going down to 3 days a week has made me look at all the facets of my practice, all of the systems, and it's brought to light some of the inefficiencies that we had before that I don't think that we would have noticed if I didn't go down to 3 days a week. So I've created a checklist now, or not a checklist, but I've created a list of all of our procedures that my two dental assistants, they are keeping track of how long it takes me to do every single procedure, start to finish, and flip the room, so that we can start logging that so that we're scheduling appropriately on the schedule. So not only, if we have procedures that we're scheduling longer, we can shorten those appointments, or vice versa. If we're scheduling too little for some appointments, we can lengthen those appointments. So just trying to figure those things out and master that before, well, I guess with my front desk and with the person making the schedule, so that we're working as a team to try to figure out how to be the most efficient. That's been step number one, because to me, and I've voiced this to you, going down to 3 days a week, I think one of the barriers that delayed my decision for so long is that I wasn't sure I could produce enough dentistry in that amount of time. And I don't know if that's how other people feel, but I'm not the fastest dentist, and I definitely want to make my patients feel like they're getting the best treatment possible, and I'm spending enough time with them. So sometimes it's hard to kind of balance that of, okay, let's get this procedure done as fast as possible, but let's also make the patient feel comfortable, talk to them enough, make them feel like they're getting great value out of the appointment. So all of those things have kind of been a big barrier for me, or that we're working through right now. But the first 3 weeks of the year, we have been fitting in a lot more treatment. We have gotten better scheduling. I feel a lot better, more engaged with every patient. Um, and overall, I think I'm just a lot happier. So I'm hoping this isn't just like a flash in the pan excitement. The first 3 weeks, I don't know how you felt when you first initially made the switch. I hope it stays this way, but currently just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it was after a couple weeks. It was like, okay, I can never go back to working 4 days a week again. I think, like I've said before, like my first month. So it was September of my second year. So that would have been 2017. September was the first month, and my production did go down the first month, but then the next month,
No
October, was
way.
my best month ever
Wow.
in
That's
practice.
awesome.
Yeah. So and I experienced the exact same thing that you're talking about as well. It's when, we've all heard people say, you give a dentist 20 minutes to do a crown prep and he'll get it done in 20 minutes. You give a dentist 90 minutes to do a crown prep and they'll spend 90 minutes doing the crown prep. And it's like, it's this idea that whatever the time or space that we're given, we feel this compulsion to use it all, to fill it all with our time, energy, or objects, or you can kind of compare it in a lot of different areas. And I think when you basically go the opposite direction and you kind of start to restrict or constrict the amount of time or space, it forces you to get more efficient. And that's what you're kind of in the middle of and kind of going through right now. And that's what I experienced. And it's super interesting to me. Again, like I'm kind of picking up on tying back into the last question with when you felt better about your with coaching, the direction of your practice, the planning. When you felt better about that, it allowed you to be a little bit more present with your wife. And I just heard you say the same thing again, where after going to 3 days a week, and it kind of forces you to get dialed in. And now what I heard you just say is that like your interactions with patients are a little bit more deliberate and a little bit more meaningful. You agree with that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. When I used to say to my wife and to all of my friends on Thursdays when I went into the office, I was just kind of going through the motions, man. Like, I was so burnt out come Thursday most days. Like, I would have a list of things to do. My front desk would have a list of things for me to do. I'd have antibiotics I need to send in. And the the hygiene checks that I would be doing on that Thursday were not nearly as efficient or as productive as they were on Mondays. I think everybody can relate to that. Monday morning, you go in, you're making the most of every patient, you're diagnosing everything that you see. Thursdays, you're running behind on a procedure and you're just trying to get out of that hygiene room. And it seems like they always want to talk to you when you're behind schedule. But I just felt like Thursdays were a wash. Some weeks I would go in there, and now I go in there and I am kind of like scared. I don't want to say scared, but I'm kind of in that mentality of, man, I need to make the most of every interaction because I'm only here for 3 days. And so it does kind of give you a little more energy throughout the day because you have that in the back of your mind, like, man, I better make the most of this. So it's definitely made a big difference in that respect. But I also think I'm just a little bit happier and I have more time to kind of sharpen my axe or kind of hone my skills, right? So I don't mind getting there a little bit earlier on those 3 days to kind of go through the schedule and make sure I'm not missing anything, whether it be treatment that we diagnosed previously. I go through the schedule, the morning before seeing all the patients and just want to refresh my mind of, okay, did we diagnose this last year? Why didn't they do it? Did we talk about it? Is there a reason why they said they didn't want to go through with the procedure? Things like that. And so I think I'm just kind of more engaged and that's helped so far. And like I said, it's only been 3 weeks, but I hope it stays that way. And it's, everybody that I've heard that's come on the podcast has said similar things about going down to 3 days per week. So, um, yeah, I think you're definitely right. I think it's helped and made me more present for sure.
Yeah. So I want to touch on one of your biggest concerns when we were kind of like planning um, and kind of talking about how we were going to logistically make changes and go this direction. You had a concern that with your staff, right? Talk talk about the concern, and then talk about like when you talk to your staff and how did it play out?
Yeah, that was one of the cooler experiences of the whole process. I was extremely worried my staff would kind of see me as like, I don't want to say greedy, I don't know the proper word to use, but maybe that I just didn't want to work, lazy, greedy. I was just kind of scared of what they may think. Most people think dentists don't work anyways. Most people are thinking dentists work 4 days a week. How lucky. But they don't really see the behind the scenes of at least my side. I don't know about anybody else, but most Fridays I would at least go to the office for a couple hours just to get caught up on emails, reviewing treatment plans or consults that I, didn't get to that previous week. Or renovations. I bought like an older office building, so we are constantly trying to renovate and change things out. So I didn't really ever get a 3-day weekend consistently. Obviously I would take that Friday off, but definitely not consistently. So to me, I was working 5 days a week, and obviously my staff didn't know that. So in their eyes, when I come out and tell them, hey, I want to go down to 3 days a week, I was afraid they would just think I'm lazy, didn't want to work, and that may project on them, right? Like the whole point of being a great leader is you want to set an example of, hardworking and you want to do everything you can to further the business. And so I was worried about what they would think, and I think that we've talked about limiting beliefs and how that may affect you and where that stems from. I don't know where that thought stems from. I don't even know if it has any weight or, you know, why I thought that. But when I initially, finally held a meeting, I think it was over lunch one day. It was just our normal lunch. I remember being really nervous to tell them, like, hey guys, I would like to go down to 3 days a week. Even though my plan was not to cut their hours, I logically thinking about it, looking back, I think that they would be more happy, right? They're getting paid to not do as much. But I was still nervous, and I don't know why. I know we talked about it at the time, but they handled it super well. They were, I kind of just told them, like, I think this is going to be better for the practice and better for me. And kind of that I was vulnerable with them and just kind of told them like, hey, I'm working my butt off here, and I just don't feel like I'm at a good mental health space, and I want to try to work 3 days a week. And they all handled it great. I actually had my office manager slash front desk come up to me afterwards, and she was like smiling ear to ear. And I think she's about 65. No, maybe no, she just turned 60. And she was like, "Man, you must have had a video camera at my dinner last night because I was just telling my husband and my family I really hope Dr. Darley lets me go down to 3 days a week next year." And she was just really excited because obviously we don't need, we have one front desk, two assistants, and two dental hygienist. So obviously, we don't need two assistants and a front desk working all the time. So, she took the opportunity to be like, hey, if I train the assistant really well to handle the front, would you be okay if I also work 3 days a week? And so she was really bought into it, which I thought was the most important part because she's the scheduler. And I was worried that we would not be able to schedule enough dentistry during that time, during just 3 days a week. And so knowing that I had her on board gave me even more confidence. And she's working constantly to try to help me achieve my goal because it's also helping her achieve her goal of going down to 3 days per week. So that's been really awesome. And she'll call me sometimes on the way home. She drives about an hour and a half to and from work every day. So she'll call me on the way home sometimes, be like, hey, like, I think I figured out why today was a little slow, or I think I figured out why today we ran a little bit behind. Let's talk about it tomorrow. So it's been awesome having her kind of bought into it. Whereas if I feel like if I didn't make that decision and go down to 3 days a week, she would not have kind of wanted to work harder either because she is now working to get down to 3 days a week too. So that's been a awesome experience, and I did not expect that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think one of the lessons here is to not let things become an issue before they're actually an issue. There's a lot of times that we think through challenges or almost like expect opposition that is actually never there. And there's a quote by Marcus Aurelius where he basically says that our fears exist so much more strongly in our minds than they do in reality. And so, if my fears are up here, but my actual challenges are down here, it'd make a lot of sense for me to like bring down my fears to the same level of my challenges and obstacles, so that I'm not causing myself extra pain. And I think this is a good example where this kind of plays into it, where, you were kind of concerned, that the staff is going to have opposition and stuff like that. And then they ended up being very supportive. So you potentially went through, like the, the challenge and like the worry of having that conversation and what it was going to be like when, if you can learn that lesson, then the next time when you're in the moment, you can kind of say, okay, well, I don't know. They might have opposition, but I'm just not going to worry about it until we get to that point. If they do at that point, then we can talk through it. We can ask questions. We can solve it. But I'm not going to like, stress myself out over it if nothing exists yet in reality.
Exactly. Yeah. And I agree 100%. Now, I did have my dental assistant who is an all-star. I mean, I feel like she just loves to work. She is a team player. She always likes to be working. And so she was a little bit disappointed, I guess. I don't know if disappointed is the right word, but she gets a little bored on the days off. So it has been a challenge to try to create value in that time for her, whether it be calling patients to talk about following up with either new patients or existing patients that did not go through a treatment. So that has been a big challenge in trying to keep her busy, and I'm still trying to figure that out. So if anybody listening has any ideas for that, or if they've gone through this and they have a similar dental assistant problem, or if you have any solutions for that, I know we've talked about it at length. That's been one of the challenges that this has brought on as well.
Yeah. And again, I think that's such a great challenge to have. You have an employee that's, somewhat of an overachiever and wants the additional responsibility. I think one thing that I did in that situation is start start keeping track of every single duty that you have to do throughout the week. And then after you have like a pretty good list of that, start to think and go back through that list and say, okay, what of all of these things can possibly be delegated? And then go to that assistant and say, hey, here's a list of things, are what of all these things on here are you comfortable doing, or would you like to learn, and I can kind of train you. I can offload some of these duties, because I had a very similar employee, and she ended up being my best. Like, I started having her do stuff in, like, even for my personal life, like with some stuff with just paying some bills, and like things that, like, it was just easy to kind of offload and take off my plate. Um, but again, something that you never would have kind of the opportunity to cross that bridge if you hadn't kind of made the decision and get to this point. So I think if we were to kind of wrap up things here, this is one of those areas that I feel like there is a certain amount of planning that can be done, but then there's a lot that you kind of have to work through once it gets there. And like we talked about, you take the leap, and a big part of what this transition is to 3 days a week is, like I said, you're kind of in the middle of it, because you took the leap. Now you're having different conversations with staff members. You're kind of working through, how do we cut out the extra fluff and make things more efficient. Like you said, even in your interactions with patients, they're just a little bit more targeted and direct. um, so, yeah, I appreciate you coming on, Steve. I'd love to do one more episode with you. We kind of started getting into a little bit of the mindset stuff at the end here, and I think you have more valuable experiences and things that you could share if we can get you back for one more episode. If you're, are you open to that? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I listen to this podcast every time you guys interview somebody. I usually am able to take away something from it, and you guys have helped me tremendously. And initially, I don't love attention, and I don't love kind of being vulnerable, but I feel like you guys have helped me so much. I feel like even if I can just help, one other person or anybody listening, then it's a good service. So absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. Um, do you have any lasting thoughts, or to anyone that's listening to this and kind of thinking about taking the leap to 3 days a week? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, it was a hard decision for me, and some of what helped me make the decision was hearing all of your clients or success stories of people who have done it, and that's part of the reason why I came on here. Is uh, I think every time I heard someone had made that jump, it made me closer to making that decision. So um, I think just having it, if that's your goal, if you have any questions about the process or anything and you want to reach out, I'm open to that. It's a super hard decision, and I thought about it for a long time, but it's been worth it so far, and hopefully time will only solidify that. And just early on, but if you have any questions, let me know.
Very cool. What's the best way for anyone listening that wants to get a hold of you?
Probably email. My email is Steve, Steve dot Darley, Darley 88, the number 88, not ADA, dot at gmail.com.
Thank you again for coming on. Thanks for being vulnerable and honest, and kind of sharing pros and cons of the process. And I think this will be very valuable. It's always good to hear somebody else's perspective. Like, I can talk about my experience, a number of times, but having somebody like you on that has different thoughts, different concerns, and different experiences is really helpful to everyone. So thank you for your time, Steve, and we'll see you back for one more episode.
Thanks, Derek.
Sicker than your average, sicker than your average. Sicker than your average, sicker than your average.